Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding and Golding, here to discuss the basics of reasonable cause to avoid IRS penalties for us in the realm of international tax. So the idea is when a person makes a mistake, okay, oftentimes the IRS will still penalize them because they don't know all of the background or the history. For example, someone receives a gift from a foreign person or owns a foreign corporation. They have to file a 5471 or 3520. They didn't know this, right? So with their original returns, this isn't included. And then after the fact, they go to a new CPA or tax specialist and they learn, oh, wow, I should have been doing it. Doesn't seem like a big deal, right? The corporation didn't issue any money to the taxpayer. They don't have any subpart F or anything. The gifts aren't taxable. So the mere fact that Jimmy didn't report a $500,000 gift doesn't seem like a big deal. Until, of course, down the line, where they file these forms, they don't show reasonable cause at the outset, or they're not able to prove it afterwards, and then the IRS dings them with a humongous penalty with a 3520 gift from a foreign person. It could be, if it's more than 5 months, it could be a 25% penalty on the value of the gift. So if it's a $500,000 gift, 25% would be what? $125,000 penalty to the IRS because you didn't know about a form, even though you have no unreported income, because that gift is not income. So one way that a taxpayer can try to avoid the penalties is reasonable cause. And there's a lot of horrific information out there, okay? Just because you didn't file it doesn't mean you're willful. And you can do reasonable cause. I mean, you're supposed to do it when you do the submission, but if it's not done properly, then you get dinged anyway. You can go to a specialist and try to get that penalty removed based on reasonable cause. So just because they hit you with a penalty doesn't mean you're willful, doesn't mean you did anything serious, and doesn't mean you can't get the penalty waived. In order to prove reasonable cause, there's various factors you have to consider. In general or in total, it's referred to as totality of the circumstance. What is the totality of the circumstance that led this taxpayer to not properly report the foreign gift, the foreign corporation, foreign partnership, foreign trust, etc., etc.? Most important is taxpayer has to show reasonable cause and there was no willful neglect, okay? If you go through the Internal Revenue Manual and the code, they use a bunch of what they refer to in lawsuits as weasel words. They're like it's one synonym of another synonym, and the words don't mean anything apart. But when you put them all together in a chain, they still don't mean anything. But if the IRS doesn't want to waive your penalty, they will just regurgitate that to you and tell you that you don't have reasonable cause. So it's super important that when you present it either chronologically or in a storyline format, so that remember, the IRS agent, this isn't probably their life dream to work at the IRS, right? So the idea is they're not necessarily pointing you out specifically. Obviously, it feels personal when you submit some forms, or you don't submit them, and someone there signed a letter saying you're going to get hit with a $125,000 penalty. But at the end of the day, we have found in our experience that the agents, this is their job, right? So if you can prove to them reasonable cause, then there's a good chance that they will waive the penalty. Because if you can show reasonable cause and the IRS agent, for lack of a better word, is not being reasonable, then when that moves down the line, whether it's IRS Office of Appeals or tax court, federal court, the IRS can get in some trouble too if they're not being reasonable, if they're forcing you to spend fees on attorneys and whatnot. You may be able to recoup that depending on how egregious their conduct is. So a couple of things to keep in mind, okay? A lot of times when people have international penalties, they'll start saying, oh, first-time penalty abatement. But technically the first-time penalty abatement isn't specifically for international penalties. It's more for, you filed it late, failure to file, failure to pay, things of that nature. Now, not all agents know that, so there's not normally any harm bringing it up. And in fact, even though technically it's not the first time penalty abatement, if it is the first time that you have had this particular issue with the IRS and you are otherwise in compliance, then that is a factor toward the totality of the circumstance, okay? If you submit reasonable cause and it's rejected, then you do have avenues you can go. There's something called the collection due process hearing, something called the collection appeals. When you could do it, what point of the process is different. And one super important thing to keep in mind is for oftentimes if you do a CAP, collection appeal process 9423, that will stop or prevent you from doing a CDP, collection due process request, later in the process. The reason why that's so important is with a collection due process, you can still litigate it after. With a collection appeal process 9423, you can't. Also, with the collection due process, you generally get someone who has some authority and who is pretty well versed on whatever topic it is that is the basis for you requesting reasonable cause. So it's good. So if you get, what'll happen oftentimes is the first person you shoot the letter to, it's not, because no one at the IRS really wants to take on all of that headache and waive a huge penalty from the outset. So it normally takes a few bites at the apple. So it is important that if it doesn't work out initially, before you just start filing forms, the first opportunity you'll get is a CAP, but it may not necessarily be the way you want to go. It may be the way you want to go. One thing that's nice is that it's binding on the IRS and the taxpayer. So if all the facts are in your favor, then it's something to consider. If you're out of compliance, you may want to consider getting into compliance before you have to deal with all of this headache. We have lots of information available on our main website, goldinglawyers.com, and our sub-websites as well. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation. You can discuss the different programs, streamlined voluntary disclosure, delinquency procedures, and of course, reasonable cause. Again, my name is Sean Golding for Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.